1978, that certainly felt like a long, long time ago. Many kilos ago, that's for sure. So if I can welcome up the panel, and I'll start with the order you guys are walking up in. Jack Caress needs no introduction here at TBI, of course, from is it 30 years of leading Pacific Sports, and then as the founding president of Triathlon America that then became TBI. Next to Jack there, Dave McGillivray, one of not the most renowned marathon race directors in the world. Dave first gained prominence in 1978 when he ran across the United States to raise money for charity. Since then, Dave has accomplished numerous other exciting and international feats and earned a reputation as one of the world's finest race directors. Thank you. As now the leader of DMSE Sports Enterprises, Dave is the race director for the Boston Marathon, and has his event management company has produced over 900 events. At the end, well, Andrew obviously has just had his introduction. There's no need to go into details of as his role as CEO of IRONMAN. And at the end, we've got John Connors, who's the vice president at the Color Run, or Bigsley Events as it's now known. John was instrumental in the founding of the Color Run series, an event series which I'm sure needs no introduction here. It's had over 3 million runners over the last 5 years and had 140 events in 2015. John is now responsible for the development of new events at Bigsley, and we'll hear about that in just a few minutes' time. So as Barry said, this panel is about the future of commercial event management within the sport, and a particularly relevant subject we felt because to be a sport in triathlon, we need events. It goes without saying. You can't be a triathlete unless you're doing triathlons. And so race directors and event management are an incredibly important part of that. So as an opening question to all four of you, over the last 10, 15 years, the sport's really outgrown its niche roots. And in fact, the audience here today is testament to the fact that this is an industry now. Being an industry, though, of course, brings challenges and opportunities. What are the biggest challenges or opportunities that each of you see facing you now and into the future? And maybe, Dave, I'll start with you.
First of all, I just want to thank you, Sam, and Active for providing all this for all of you. Before I answer your question, I want to ask a few so we know who we're talking to here. First of all, how many people in the audience are race directors? Okay, and how many people in the audience were race directors in the 1980s? Raise your hand. Raise your hands high. See how, these are the old people in the room, right? But the reason why I'm asking that question is that I directed my first triathlon in 1980, and people were constantly asking me, you think you're really going to earn money doing this? Back then. And you know, it was funny because I did the Ironman in 1980, and then I came back and did an Ironman distance race in New England in 1983. And for me, it was more about a passion. It was more about trying to give something back. Years ago, when people asked me what I did for a living, I used to mumble, a race director. What? Race director. I was embarrassed. My brother's, he works for the blind, and my other brother's an accountant, my sister's a nurse, my other sister's a social worker. Dave's a race director. Like, what do you do? Chalk mark in the road, yell go? Right. And now, seeing all of you, when people say to me, what do I do for a living? I say, I help raise the level of self-esteem and self-confidence of tens of thousands of people in America. Because that's what we all do. You're all literally, you may not think this, but in my world, you're heroes, because you're giving people a chance. Because there's nothing better in life and more important in life than to feel good about yourself. And you're giving people that opportunity. And those of you who started like a Fred or a Terry or Jack, it took guts to do this. It took a lot of guts to put it out there, on the line. So as far as my background, I, again, started producing a couple of triathlons, then I ended up doing the World Championship in 1990, did the Goodwill Games Triathlon, USDS, ITU, World Cups, represented athletes. So I was very fortunate that I started my business with triathlon. And it was funny, I just went back to Hawaii after 25 years, thank you, to do the Ironman. And the title of this whole thing is Changing Times, the Changing Times. I hadn't been back to the Ironman. I did it 8 times in the 80s, and I went back in 2014. And when I arrived, I was blown away. Talk about changing times. I mean, they actually had bike racks this time. Changing times. A lot has changed over the years, and because of all of you people in the room. Now it's a different sport. Road racing is, and triathlon is, mass participatory sports. It's all very, very different. And so you ask, basically what are the challenges? Interestingly, back then we were on all fours trying to beg people to do our events. 2, 3, 4, 500 was a lot back then. Now, I know a lot of people who direct races who don't fill up won't have a lot of sympathy for me on this, but some of the biggest challenges I find right now is the whole concept of turning people away. You were just talking about a lottery. I call it a random selection. It's all vernacular, right? And we've created almost a Frankenstein, something where so many people on the planet now seem to want to do. Most of the races that I direct, the Boston Marathon or Falmouth Road Race or all these other races, you flick a switch and 10 minutes later it's full. And then what do I do when my race is filled? I hide under my bed because so many other people now are contacting me to say, how do I get in? How do I get in? So it's an interesting dynamic of what happened 20, 25, 30, 35 years ago and what's happening in the world today in terms of that. The next thing is the proliferation of events. I don't know about Europe and about internationally, but here domestically, for me, the toughest part about putting on an event is getting permission to do it because there are so many of them. So how do I get permission to do mine? So you have to go to 2nd tier, 3rd tier, 4th tier cities or communities within which to put the events on. So the further you go away from a metropolitan region, the tougher it is to get media, the tougher it is to get sponsorship. And all of a sudden now you're challenged by that. So that dynamic has obviously come into play. And the last thing is that, for me anyways, given what happened in 2013 at my race in Boston, the industry right now for me comes down to 3 things. 1 is security, 2 is technology, and 3 is medical. Kind of interesting. I used to think I'd just move a couple of road cones and I had it down, right? Now it's just all very, very, talk about changing times. We have to focus on so many other things that might be outside of our scope of expertise. So how do you deal with it? You surround yourself with good people. You surround yourself with good people. So those things have literally changed. And then the cost. Right now, security at the Boston, we have over 4,000 law enforcement officials. It's a Tier 2 event. You have the feds there, the Secret Service there. It's all very, very different now. So who pays for all of that? So now we're in that conundrum of they require that we provide it, but who's going to pay for it? So these are the challenging things. And everything is just personal. In other words, your challenges may be very different than mine, but we're all basically, dealing with challenges and how do we continue to keep this industry growing and safe. So those are the ones that I'm dealing with.
It's a great answer. Tough act to follow with that. Jack, what do you think?
Oh, is he done? Now, I'm just remembering the first time I did the Ironman, we didn't have any fluid replacement drink. We had to bring our own. Remember Erg? Anybody remember that product? That was awful. That stuff was terrible. When Gatorade came in, made life, and you leave your own food out in different spots. Bike racks were good. Some of what Dave said, I cannot relate to the flicking of the switch and having the race fill up. I want to have that day someday, but that doesn't seem to happen on most events. I think the 2 things I would want to focus on, one are permits, and Dave did touch on that a little bit. We have chosen, for better or worse, to put on races in major cities and in the heart of major cities like Los Angeles, Dallas, Cleveland, New York. And it's getting more and more difficult, not only to get the permits, but more and more expensive to attempt to get the permits in a major city. And I had an interesting conversation actually at the World Championships that were in Chicago about, and if you notice it in the events that Andrew was talking about with the World Triathlon Series, that for the most part they've moved out of the major cities. They're going to, I mean, London now is going to be moving to Leeds, Chicago. You could debate that. I mean, it's a great location where the race was in Chicago, but it's not coming back. It's more, and it's more. It's simpler to go to a second-tier city that wants the event and is willing to provide potentially services or CVB type grants and money. The major cities, the conversations there are different. As Dave said, you know, with security, with perceived security issues, even if they're not as pronounced as even bigger events, the costs have gone up. So I see that with our events that are all over the United States, and in some cases in the past years around the world, that has become a very big issue. So, and directly related to the difficulty in getting permits, and even smaller cities, there's a proliferation of events, and not just triathlons. It's running events, it's obstacle races, it's color runs, it's all of the different events. So cities are now bombarded by people that want to put on events, and the ease of entry into actually getting a permit. I mean, we could all decide a joke about it. We could go apply for a permit to put on a 5K in Marina del Rey. Doesn't mean, you know, it's a couple $100. Doesn't mean you're going to be successful. Doesn't mean that it will last forever. But the ease of entry into this industry in that fashion makes it challenging for those of us that are in these markets where now you may have had the most premier event, and now there's 4 or 5 smaller events that are kind of biting at your heels for entries and bleeding off those entries that really made you profitable because of their fixed costs. But what relates directly into that, and this is something a number of the race directors have heard me on the soapbox a little bit the last few years, is, and my background is largely in economics, and I think about the value that we provide to the participant versus what we're charging them it's very disproportionate. We're charging too little. It's very simple. That, to me, that, you know, now, does that mean that we're going to be able to get it? I think that we can. In other words, if we're charging $150 to $200 for an Olympic distance race, and I don't know what all the Ironman races are, but obviously there's a kind of a continuum there where the longer the race, the more expensive it has. They can charge, which is I'm jealous of, because I don't put on Ironman races, but I also know, you know, unless it was New York City, which is a whole different animal, most of the races don't necessarily cost more in terms of their actual line-by-line costs, but the perception by the athlete that they're getting more for what they're paying, and you know, maybe they're charging $600, $800 or more. I would argue that they could probably, the bucket list aspect of doing an Ironman or a Boston Marathon or a New York Marathon is far, far beyond what the value that they're charging. I think it's the same is true with sprint distance races, Olympic distance races, super sprint races. We need to understand that the cost, if we're going to make this a profession, and there's a lot of people, and I'm sure Dave would agree with me. I mean, I've got lots of people that, you know, have worked for me that are now in this industry that are putting on races themselves, and that's all great, and they're trying to make a living at it. But they need to be able to charge a fair price for their product. Yes, there's always going to be events that are going to say, well, you know, they're going to charge half of what you are. But what kind of experience are you providing? What kind of value? That's the challenge for me, is how do we separate ourselves from the clutter and make sure that the events we're doing are unique enough that people choose ours over all of the competition. And if they do choose your event, I think that they'll pay a fair price for it. And I've started comparing, you know, what do you pay for a hotel room? What are you paying for? What are you paying for a ticket to a baseball game or a football game? What are you paying for a bottle of wine? What are those other experiences providing you that are the equivalent of doing a triathlon that you're going to probably remember the rest of your life, even if it's you'll have memories of it. So I think those are the two. You know, I could talk for a long time, like my colleague Dave could. We do that, and But those are the two that I focus on most.
So you, talking on that theme, Active recently polled many millions of athletes that register for us each year, and we found that the financial commitment of doing a major long-distance race ranged from between $5,000 and about $25,000 when you took up the total amount of what they had to do from travel, spend, etc. Event owners and race directors are getting a not a relatively small, a very, very small slice of that, despite being ultimately the creators of that economic activity. Andrew, John, I mean, what are your thoughts on how you as race directors can capture more of that wallet share?
Well, good question. These are always really funny things for me. The color run has such a funny reputation, and so when I come to these, I always feel like I'm Justin Bieber coming to like a jazz music panel, and everyone's like, "Why are you here, dude?" This is also made especially cool because I've read articles by these guys for a really long time, and like we are all very lucky to be hearing from these guys. The industry as a whole, even all the way down to the fun-running, goofy space that I live in, is made better by the work that these guys have done. So I feel very honored to be here with them, and hopefully you know that the things that you put out into the industry about putting on safe events and putting on well-organized events and focusing on experience is heard all down the line. So thank you for everything you do, legitimately. As it relates to the economic impact of events, I mean, you have to make sure that you view it in the right sense. If what you're after, and I think it's what we all are after, is a long-term successful event, that's part of a community. Success comes only as your event becomes part of a community, and so you're going to create revenue for other people besides yourself. Hopefully you create revenue for lots of other people besides yourself, and as your event helps strengthen their businesses and as their success aligns with yours, that will drive ultimately your success. So when you start an event that will introduce a lot of people to running, and a local running shoe store figures out, man, I can sell shoes to people who've never had running shoes before because of this event, and they find a way to align with you, they're going to drive registrations to you, and you're going to help them sell a lot of shoes as well. And you should be okay with just them getting the money from selling the shoes. You don't have to say, now I'm going to become a shoe distributor also. But I think what you're looking at really is what I'm interested at least in when you look at the amount of money that is spent by these athletes as they get into the space, is how can I align with other businesses who are also motivated in helping this change for these athletes be a long-term lifestyle change. And if we can align each other correctly, then we really do have a chance of making this not just a one-off thing for people, but something that happens over and over and over again.
Great answer. Andrew, you've diversified Ironman's revenue streams over the last few years. I think of the coaching business and the expansion there. Is that a major part of your strategy moving forward?
We're going to be doing more of that. The Ironman U was really it was an initiative that came from, some of the international trends that I talked about earlier, which is if you're an athlete in Ecuador or the Philippines or Brazil or any number of other places, and you want to do a race, how do you find a coach? And how do you find a coach who has some threshold level of capability? We believe strongly that that anyone performs better if you have a coach. Doesn't matter if you're a world champion. Doesn't matter if you're trying to get to the finish line of your very first triathlon, and it's a sprint in Naperville, Illinois. That having a coach increases the likelihood that you'll have the race that you want. And one of the conundrums that we were dealing with was, what about everybody that isn't in the United States that doesn't have access to the USAT, to USAT coaches? What do they do? How do those athletes find somebody who's reputable and somebody who can help them? And that really was the original vision of Ironman U. And then as we started down the path, we realized that really within our ecosystem of partners and coaches and others, that we actually knew a lot about the subject, and that we were as good or better as anyone, and we really feel like the product we've created is a strong one. But I think that, you know, we want our athletes to have a great experience, and we think that, you know, a coach helps. It's part of the larger ecosystem. You know, about 35% of our coaches worldwide, or excuse me, 35% of our athletes worldwide have coaches, and we want our athletes to avail themselves of coaches. We want them to have good races, because we think if they have good races and a good experience, they're more likely to stay with the sport. They're more likely to come back. They're more likely to race with us again, and that really is our long-term self-interest. You know, going back to the overall theme of this panel, one of the things that I think is incumbent on all of us is to capture and keep the imagination of our athletes. And you know, something that the Color Run's done well. It's something that athletes all around the world, you know, do for Boston. You know, athletes everywhere are focused on, like, where am I going to qualify for Boston? How am I going to qualify for Boston? How fast do I have to be to qualify for Boston? And capturing the imagination of our athletes is the most critical thing that you can do in our sport. You have to create good events. You have to create events that are safe. You have to create events that work in every respect. But ultimately, you need to get and hold the imagination of our athletes. Our sales organization and Sam, you and your colleagues at Active, all love to talk about the demographic profile of triathletes. They have good jobs. They spend lots of money. They're deeply engaged. They are, you know, they're great customers. We all know this, and is part of what makes our sport great. The part that is scarier is that these are the people that have the most options. These are the people that can do anything they want to with their time and their money. And if we're not able to keep them focused on our sport, instead of doing Ironman Lake Placid, you know, they're going to take their family to France for 2 weeks summer vacation. And they'll conclude that they don't want to do the 5-hour ride on Saturday, and they don't want to run for 2.5 hours on Sunday, and that instead what they're going to do is they're going to play a couple sets of tennis and have brunch with their friends. Like, that is, from our perspective, that is our great existential threat, is that people conclude the life is just too hard and it's not worth it. So we spend a ton of time on athlete experience at events, but we spend a lot of time on community. And I've talked a little bit about the Tri-Club program. We've got an all-world athlete program. We've got a whole series of programs whose intention collectively is to keep people engaged with us, to give people the next challenge, to give people a compelling reason to get up and do the long ride on Saturday and the long run on Sunday. And you know, and a lot of the thinking about engagement and community, like, I stole from the guy next to us, because I think what a lot of these shorter formats have done really, really well is, how do you get people engaged? How do you get them excited? How do you get people thinking and talking about your events? And I think it's incumbent on us to always be thinking, you know, how are we providing the next great compelling challenge for our athletes? And I think the people who do that well are going to be the people who succeed. And if we don't collectively do it well, you know, people are going to take the money in the family budget, and you know, they're going to go to Aspen and go skiing for a week, instead of going and doing one of my races, or you know, trying to qualify for Boston, which I'm trying to do, by the way.
So keeping with the theme of engagement, arguably as triathlon has become more mainstream, it's lost its cool factor. It's no longer the extreme thing in the office. If you're the triathlete in the office when you're going and drinking at the water cooler, it's not as unique as it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. As sports like ultra running have become bigger, mud racing, obstacle racing, there are lots of other choices that challenge that engagement. What does that mean for your businesses, and what opportunities do you think you can overcome it? And maybe Dave, I'll ask you first. Well,
I wonder if it really has lost its cool factor. I don't think it necessarily has. It's a big world out there. Look with all the mud obstacle races and the color runs and stuff. You know, we're this bubble about only so many millions of people, and then there's all these people outside of that haven't engaged, and folks like John and others involved in all these other industries, if you will, they're getting people off the couch to do something, and then eventually my hope is that they become ours. It becomes a lifestyle versus just a social environment or whatnot. So I don't really think that it's cool. Again, I come back to triathlon's an interesting dynamic because the limiting factors can be enormous. I mean, time and space in my industry is paramount. You know, shutting down roads and getting space to conduct events. So you can only put so many people out there. There you're limited. One of the reasons why I kind of morphed a little bit away from triathlon producing them was because it's obviously, I took the easy way out. It's a lot easier to put on a 5K road race where you say, go down to that cone, turn around, come back. You know, here's your bagel and banana, now go home, in so many words, and you can get 10,000 people to do it. So different perspective when it comes to running a business. And talking about the money aspect to it, the way I've always looked at it, like I look at going out for a run, I used to think about going out for a run as being quasi-selfish. I'm leaving my family, I'm out there, I'm doing my own thing. And now I've turned 180, and I think it's totally unselfish because I'm taking care of myself so that I don't burden someone else to have to take care of me for me, and I can put myself in a position to help other people. Same thing with putting on events. The worst thing that any of us in this room can do is to lose money, is to not succeed, because the entire ship goes down. And that's how we have to educate our participants in knowing that too. We have to survive so that they can survive. So it's interesting to play off of that. So, you know, and the opportunity to put on triathlons. In New England, it's a small window. Like Mark and other people who live in New England, we only have June, July, August, we're done. That's it. So it's very, very limiting, and I think that's the bigger challenge. I don't think it's lost its you know, its cool factor.
So John, like you said earlier, very different perspective with your races, or races, I should say, experiences really that you put on, and you're attracting millions and millions of new people to the sport each year. How much time to sport, I should say, in general, rather than triathlon, how much time do you spend thinking about how you keep those millions of people still doing the sport and preventing it from being a one-and-done experience?
We dedicate a lot of time to it. How successful we are is another question. But just to piggyback a little bit off of what Dave said here, and what is, because I think it ties to the answer to this. There's a bit of a cultural zeitgeist right now that I think is worth mentioning and worth tapping into, and it touches on this idea of whether it's really cool to do an obstacle course or a triathlon or the color run, or whether it's something else that's actually cool, and those things fit into that. And I think it's that it's something else. There's this quote from a writer named Anna Quinlan where she says, life is made up of moments. And she goes on to say it's these glittering pieces of mica in a long stretch of gray cement. And it'd be wonderful if they came to us unsummoned, but in lives as busy as ours, we have to actually make time to go out and find them and almost force ourselves to do it. And ultimately, that's what we're selling, is we're selling these little bits of mica in the long stretches of gray cement that are the boring parts of people's lives. And so what's cool, like the thing that's cool, is having some mica in your life, having something sparkling that you can cling to when you're feeling desperate, that you can tell people about when you're sitting by the water cooler or whatever. And whether it's the color run or a triathlon or a mud run or any other type of event, what people are looking for is things that can be this mica. And that affects the way we talk to our participants a little bit, is because now what we're pitching, what we're trying to sell them is an experience that fits into the broader balance of your life. What's cool now is not necessarily being really, really extreme in one way or the other. What's cool is to be a really balanced person that has both a successful athletic life, but a family and a career, or whatever these things are. You have a handful of things that make up who you are. And to fit into that larger picture of who someone is, instead of saying to our athletes, you have to become what our picture of an athlete is, that limits the group of people you talk to quite a bit. But if you say, we're going to offer an experience that you can take and you can mold it into your life story and you can create some meaning out of this experience, and we're going to give you some tools that will help you add meaning to your life through our event, then it becomes really applicable to lots of people. And that's what we find as we focus on how we're going to speak to our runners. That's more the angle we're going with them. Is we're not saying, hey world, this is what a color runner looks like. If this looks like you, then this is an event for you. What we're saying is, hey world, you all look really different and you all look really cool. We have an event that you can add to your life and kind of add some depth and dimension and add some mica into your long stretch of gray cement. And so bring whatever you are to it, and we'll have this kind of shared experience together. So what we're really sharing, all of us, whether it's fun running or triathlon, we're selling experiences. We're selling people memories. As far as it comes to these people we've brought into the space and how do we keep them active in the space, I think where you at Ironman are really look at these long distances as what your specialty is, we're the absolute inverse of that. We do short distance races and nothing else. And so we're 60 to, in some markets, 80% first-time 5K participants. We're people who've not done any sort of athletic event before in their life. And our company doesn't have any intention of riding with them into the 10K and half marathon and marathon space. Our hope is that someone will pick them up. And we see that a lot, that they'll write to us a year or two later and say, I just competed in the Boston Marathon or whatever it is, and they're really excited because they say, we started running 3 years ago with the Color Run. But I do feel like there's still a space between these participants who are entering into the fun run space and where the competitive running space begins, that's kind of being, it's not being serviced quite completely. Run Disney's doing a pretty good job of it. I think we see a lot of our runners that will run in our event and then move to a Run Disney 5K, and then they'll push through that whole Run Disney series and end up doing the Dopey Challenge or something. And now you've got people that are running, 50, 60 miles in a weekend because Disney's found a way to make it about something other than just competitive running. But I think there's an opportunity there. Back to your very first question of the day, where are some opportunities? There are a lot of people who have now entered into an athletic space and they don't have a very simple next step. What the Color Run did is give people a really easy step off of the couch, where you say, we're going to take away all of these barriers that have made you in the past think you won't run a 5K. We'll get rid of them and tell you, you will win at this event no matter what, because it's untimed. Really, like, winning at this event means I got there and there was a good photo op. I promise you that will be there. And so you will have success. You will achieve what you wanted to achieve at the Color Run. If we can find a way to make it that simple to step into even slightly longer distances, to remove some of those barriers, then you start getting into really making longer lifestyle changes for people.
Jack, did you want to comment?
Well, I was going to, it's all coming together. What John said is, there's so much in common with what he just described with frankly, what Dave said at the beginning. When you were doing the Ironman in the early 80s, a bike rack, oh my God, we never thought about that. Didn't think about, you just brought your own food. In fact, you used to have to bring your own handlers for all of your stuff. That has entirely changed now. And the expectation of an experience, even if it's not the holy grail of doing, I think we're very fortunate to have events like Ironman Hawaii and Boston Marathon and a few other events that are the pinnacle of an experience. But the rest of us are not necessarily putting on events every weekend that might be the pinnacle. But if somebody's doing their first triathlon or their first 5K or their first Color Run, for them it is. It has changed their life forever. And the experience that people expect now will go along with the value we provide. I mean, they want things like medals. I mean, 15 years ago, it wasn't quite the same way. Now, if you don't get a nice finisher medal, that's an unusual circumstance in a race. Now they want food and beverage. I mean, a lot of our Oh, are we going to upgrade? Are we going to get burritos at the end? Are we going to get, is there going to be a wine tasting, Jack, because you're in the wine? It's like, this is what you want. And you know what? That's our challenge. What do we provide to them that even makes that weekend in, July something that is worth doing? And it doesn't have to be, I trained, 40 hours a week for a year and had to qualify to make it something that is memorable for them. And I think, and I go back to this because I've given a lot of talks and written about this, it's all being driven, to me, in my opinion, by women. When I look back at when it first got into this, there were not very many women either participating or being involved in it. And women have driven the demands of what these sports and these experiences need to be. I think it's incredibly healthy and helpful to us. And it's for us that have been in this industry for a long time to, we haven't recognized that, we're foolish. And if we're not doing it, we're going to lose. We're going to lose these customers because there's too many choices. It's not just like, they can go play tennis on the weekend or go play golf or go do whatever they want to do, but they don't have to do an event at all. So what is it that's going to compel them to participate in our events? That's the challenge, and it's part of the fun too. But again, I don't think that it necessarily has to be the bucket list event that they have to do every week. I mean, they need to train for these events and have little experiences. But thank God we've got events that they can target and make their ultimate pinnacle goal. I think we're very fortunate, and that's, to me, long-term, extremely beneficial to have those kinds of events that people can do.
So Dave, we talk about, we hear this discussion about pinnacle events, and arguably Boston being, within marathon at least, the absolute pinnacle you can get to. You have a unique experience because of your consulting role and working with many events that aren't pinnacle events. What are the main lessons that you take, or the main insights you bring to race directors who want to aspire to be Boston, but clearly budget, many different reasons, it will never be that. But what's the secret sauce that you help them find?
Well, again, with Boston, it was here way before I was born, and it'll be here way after I'm gone. And for me, I'm just a caretaker, just taking care of it for a while. And it brings unique challenges when you have something that's 120 years old, has history and tradition. And for me to make changes, the race used to start at noontime, and the course is point to point. If I ever find the person who designed this course, I'm going to wring their neck. I don't know what they were smoking, but when you look at the Boston Marathon at that time, everything about it from an operational perspective was wrong. Starting at, who starts a marathon at noon, right? And then point to point, all the inconveniences involved with that. To have to bus people out to the start, dump them off in the field, say, now you sit there and wait for 3 hours before you start to run 26.2. Doesn't make any sense. On a Monday. Who puts on a race on a Monday? No one else in the world has the day off other than us. So the inconvenience of all of that. But then it became what it became. The Holy Grail, if you will, with all due respect to all the other races around the world. But then, so that's a unique situation for me because it's very, very difficult to change it. It takes years to make any kind of significant change. But then you have new events, and it's a lot of fun to give birth. And I've always felt that the genius is seeing it in the seed, is coming up with a concept like you folks did, and you have it, and we all come up with ideas, it's just acting on it, right? So for me, to work on new events is refreshing, because I can let my creative juices run wild and do anything I want for the most part versus fit in to an existing environment that no way would you be able to do that. So having that delicate balance of history and tradition, but new and improved, and being able to do something very different is, for me, I'm very fortunate. When I started my business, I owned everything I managed because, you know, I created it all. And then I just decided I wanted to morph away from that, and I didn't want to own everything because you live or die by it. And so you know, so I decided to just change it all, and now I'm just a consultant on existing races. When I was asked years and years ago, what do you think that XYZ race is worth? I used to say, nothing. No one would buy it. There weren't any sellers or buyers out there. And now the world has changed, you know, duh. I got rid of everything I owned, and now look at everything that's going on in the world. But for me, I don't have any regrets because, you know, for me, everything's guaranteed. I never lost money on any event ever. One of the reasons is because now I don't own any of them, so I'm not going to lose any money. I'm guaranteed a management fee. So I live in a very, very happy world where everything is pretty much guaranteed and multi-year deals, and I just come in, manage the race, get out, and move on to the next one. So I found a little bit of a niche. So don't think that you always have to own everything that you're managing, because if you have a skill set, you know, the whole bar and standard now has risen so high, and it's not about how many hours you put in, it's all about experience. I asked a painter once, how long did it take you to paint that beautiful painting? He said, 2 hours and 20 years. And that's how I look at what I bring to the table. I bring 35 years of experience, not just, you know, what I do on event day.
So you touched upon creativity in new events there, and one of the exciting things about triathlon is, of course, that it's a combination of multiple sports, and with new things like the Attilo swim run coming into the market. Andrew, you briefly touched upon Lagardère and this recent acquisition, and I mean, I guess if you can go further into detail there, does this represent Ironman going beyond triathlon?
Well, first I want to say I'm still thinking about little pieces of mica, which you know, is a beautiful, beautiful way to think about what we do, and one that I think is.
You're not thinking about gray cement?
Got all the gray cement you could ever possibly want. The mica, that's nice.
I'm thinking about the gray cement.
Is, you know, because really what we're looking for is, you know, these little bits of inspiration, and it's a great way to think about what we collectively do. And the other thing I just want to follow up with John's comments is that, you know, having a lot of people entering our industry is really good news for us. And whether that's in a mud run, whether that's in a color run, I think for us as an industry, anything that gets an athlete to put on a race member is good for us. Because as that pyramid gets broader and broader, it gets broader with more women, it gets broader with more new people, it gets broader with people from other countries and other parts of the world. Those people, a proportion of them, are going to continue on to more ambitious challenges. A proportion of them are going to switch to multisport. And we've got an ability to influence those proportions to some degree. But the base of people coming into our industry is something that, you know, the bigger that is, the better that is for us. So, you know, we have a race that we've owned for, we haven't even owned it yet, called the Pioneer, that starts in a week, and it is it's a 7-day mountain bike stage race from Christchurch to Queenstown in New Zealand. It's one of the Lagardère races. It's modeled on the Cape Epic, and it's you know, it's really targeted at, you know, serious multi-sport athletes, and you know, and it's every day. You know, you ride 100 kilometers and you ride through the southern Alps of New Zealand, and it sounds fabulous. It sounds like the kind of thing that a lot of our athletes would want to try, you know, once in their life or twice in their life, and so yes, you know, as we think about where we're going, are there other opportunities for us to be able to create events that are going to capture the imagination of endurance athletes? Absolutely. Ironman's fantastic. It is the core of what we do. It's going to continue to be the core of what we do. But there are lots of athletes who are aspiring to do more than just long distance try. and they participate in Grand Fondos, they participate in marathons, and for us to be able to have a certain number of those events within our portfolio, we think is interesting, because people are always looking for the next challenge and the next little piece of mica. And that might be after a few years of doing triathlons. It may be going to do Leadville. It may be going to do a mountain bike stage race. It might be Transalp. It could be the Cape Epic. It could be, Levi's Grand Fondo in Santa Rosa, California. There's all kinds of ways that people can be inspired and motivated to do the next cool, interesting, hard, challenging thing. And to some extent, it's an area that we want to do more in, and we think we're going to do more in the future.
Any further comments on? So when we announced this panel, multiple people came to me when we saw the caliber of the panel that we have here today to please make sure we had enough time to throw to the audience for questions. So Mike, if you've got the microphone, you...
Barry Siff has the microphone. You're not asking a question, Barry?
I'm passing it around.
Answered it all.
This is going off of one thing that Jack had said earlier, which was talking about not necessarily charging enough on the basis of some of these events, as we know event permits get more expensive, police requirements are more expensive, but how do we really sort of broaden the base of our event portfolio when cost can be one of the biggest barriers to entry that a new athlete has?
Go for it, Jack.
Thanks.
You're the money guy.
You're the money guy.
Well, it depends on the event. I mean, I want to make sure I understand the question. Are you talking about creating a new event? Or
like as athletes themselves, like how do we appeal further towards somebody who doesn't necessarily have the ability to buy a $3,000 bike and a $900 wetsuit,
okay,
and all of these different elements that, to an extent, we as an industry have sort of said,
right,
this is necessary to participate.
Well, I would. It depends on the event. I mean, not all. It's the explanation I often give when a question like this arises just in a small group of us is, if you want to get a hamburger, I mean, you can always go to McDonald's. I mean, there's going to be those types of experiences. If you want fast food, there are going to be a certain amount of athletes that want that. If they want to get a higher quality, if they want to go to Morton's or Ruth Chris or something like that, they're going to get a higher quality of beef, a better experience. So if they're going to, there's no reason that an athlete should have to spend a fortune to do the sport of triathlon. You don't have to have the world's greatest bike. You don't have to have a wetsuit even. I mean, I tell athletes, they say, do I have to have a wetsuit? No, you don't have to have all those things. But at some point, as they move themselves a little bit up the chain of the different types of experiences that they want, they're going to require, I shouldn't say require, they're going to want better equipment. They're going to want to have a deeper experience. I mean, and you look at the kind of scope of events that are out there. I mean, there are going to be events that are going to charge, $20 for a 5K run, and people are going to be happy about it. But there are other events, Color Run's going to perhaps charge more than that, but they're offering a different experience for that. And then you just sort of, I look at it as sort of like a baseball game or a football game. Yeah, there's going to be all different kinds of prices of seats. It depends on what the experience is you want. If you want to sit in the best seats in the house, it could cost you, at a Laker game, although the Lakers suck, maybe not a good example, a Clipper game. It's like, a Clipper game, I mean, it's going to cost you, $3,000 to sit by the court. Or you can sit up in the very highest seats and pay, $20. It just depends on what kind of experience you want. So I think maybe we look at doing dynamic pricing where you're offering some different types of experiences for the athletes. But I think that there's something for everyone, I guess, is kind of the long-winded way of putting that.
So the subject of, excuse me, sorry. The subject of dynamic pricing is something that's particularly close to active. It's something we spent a lot of time over the last 2 years developing the ability for organizers to price more effectively. And if we look at other industries, and in fact I'm giving a talk on it later today, as you look at things like airlines, the level of effort that goes into pricing a ticket on a given day at a given time, it's based on data. And that's an area which we certainly feel the events industry is long behind. Even with good examples, as Jack just mentioned then, with live entertainment sports, have embraced this fact that the ticket price is going to change. It's going to change based on demand on a given day. And so there's a huge opportunity there. There is no reason why an Ironman shouldn't start. The opening price could be $1. And if you're lucky enough to be that person that gets the ticket
That's
for $1,
happening. That's going to happen.
But then it could go all the way up to $10,000. Do you have a comment on that, Joe?
A little too dynamic, I think.
Maybe that's too dynamic, exactly.
We have a question right here, and I just want to introduce Michael Epstein, who I remember 15 years ago writing a story for a magazine, the second most influential person in the world in adventure racing. So this guy knows a lot about creating great events.
Or do I? What happened to that sport? I'm not sure. So I have a couple of questions along the same lines. For Ironman and for Color Run, I'm curious to what your retention rates are like, and then kind of on that same vein for active, what you see attendance at triathlon like across the board.
All right. Go ahead. I mean, I suspect we're close to opposites, but Color Run's retention rate's about 20%, so we've got a pretty low retention rate. We will see people come back a couple years later, so there's a couple different ways you can measure it. We're now in our 5th year putting on the events, so we'll have a lot of people do multiple events, but for the most part, people are looking at the Color Run as a launching pad into something else. So that's us.
So the way we define retention is someone who raced with us last year, a unique individual athlete who raced with us last year, was also racing with us this year. We're in the low 50s. It goes up to the mid 70s if you look at a 2 to 3 year time horizon. So there are a fair number of people who will race with us, who raced with us in 2013, did an Ironman, took 2014 off, then came back into 15. But if you look at the number of athletes who raced with us in 2014 and then also raced in 2015, it's just north of 50.
And so from Active's answer to that question, if you think about triathlon growth overall, very consistent with what Andrew was talking about earlier in his presentation, we're seeing international growing considerably quicker than the domestic business. But the other dynamic that we've certainly seen over the last 18 months, 24 months that's been particularly impactful is that the number of event organizers is growing at a considerably higher rate than the amount of participants. And so there are more and more, obviously there's more and more choice, there's more and more event organizers coming into the sport, and that's creating an interesting dynamic both for new events who launch in new areas, but also the ones that have been around for a very long time.
Just to comment on more from the pursuit of athletic excellence perspective, you know, a number of years ago, Boston closed out in 8 hours and 7 minutes. And I got a lot of calls from people like you in the room say, congratulations, and I said, congratulations. This is the worst thing that could ever have happened because people qualified and then they could have been a surgeon doing open heart surgery that day and go home at night to enter and find out it's closed after doing all that work to qualify and thinking when they crossed the finish line of whatever marathon they ran, they were guaranteed a spot. No more. It's fascinating how that has all changed just because everybody's working harder. And so we changed the whole registration process, and it was really all about rewarding those who are the best, in their respective age group. So now we basically say, okay, we're going to open it up for 2 weeks. Those people who beat their qualifying time by 20 minutes or more get in first, and then 10 minutes or more get in next, and 5 minutes more and get in next. And then the second week we open it up to anyone who qualified, and then shut it down at the end of the week, and then just put them in order. 459, 458, 457, 456, and then bang. And so you don't know going in after qualifying whether you're in or not, which is really frustrating. We turned away 4,700 people who qualified this year. And again, so we're constantly learning how to better register people and make it fair for everyone. So it's interesting moving target. The other interesting statistic is that 62% of people who do our race every year are new. Talk about retention or lack of, in a sense. So maybe it's a one and done, or maybe people work really hard, qualify, and say, I can't do that again. I don't know. So it's interesting on the upper level of the industry, you know, the pursuit of that excellence has a different dynamic maybe than all the rest.
So, I mean, I think that's really interesting. And we see the same thing at Kona. That the repeat rates are relatively low at that incredibly high level because there's so much performance that needs to go into it. I think there's people who feel like they just can't or don't want to hit that performance target every single year. It's just too hard. It takes too much out of them. They pay too much in other aspects of their lives. And I think that's where there is a big opportunity for our industry, that the people who opt out of racing, of going through the qualifying for Boston, racing Boston, they're going to do something because they're part of our community. They're going to be active. They're looking for something to do. And part of our challenge as an industry is how do we capture their imagination? Maybe it isn't going to be something as ambitious as qualifying for Boston, but it's going to be something. And same with our Ironman athletes. There's a lot of them who do an Ironman last year, and for job, family, all kinds of reasons why they just feel like they can't do it again next year. But they're going to do something next year. And part of our responsibility as an industry is we have to offer them something interesting and attractive that's going to capture their imagination. And maybe it's a different race that's one of ours, but maybe it is, you know, keep talking about Leadville, could be doing Leadville. There's all kinds of other ways that people can participate in our industry. And part of the thing we need to unlock is how do we help every year we're providing our customers and our athletes great, unique challenges, the little pieces of mica that are going to keep them coming back and keep them motivated and keep them fired up.
I just have one more comment for all of you.
Love the mica.
So, you know, in 2013, bombs went off. And the next day, the woman who won the race basically was interviewed, and she was asked if she was going to come back again. And she said no. And I just thought, is this incident going to change the industry forever? Will it change all of us? And what was interesting is my 8-year-old son was sitting in the bleachers, and he saw everything. And I went home 2 days later, and he came up to me and gave me a hug. And he said to me, Dad, I never, ever, ever want you to direct that race again. So he associated my job with danger. Imagine, we're just putting on a road race. And now that all changed. And so I really was wondering what was going to happen. I mean, was this all going to go away? I mean, bombs never went off prior to then. Bombs haven't gone off since. But will it have an impact? And the thing that made the most difference was literally all of you. All of you. It's a small community, the running community, the triathlon community. We all came together, and we basically all said we will not be denied. This isn't going to stop us. And the opposite happened. The amount of interest in people wanting to come to Boston. We had to raise our numbers up another 9,000 people just to accommodate that. So it's pretty interesting to know that it's all about us sticking together, right? The only way we're going to improve is to learn from one another. If any of you have ever called me or emailed me and asked me anything, I would never, ever, ever deny you anything. I would never keep it close to the vest. I would give you everything you want, because it's all about sharing and it's all about working together. So I want to thank all of you for your support, your compassion, to have us keep it together, and we're stronger. Scar tissue is stronger than original skin, and we're stronger today than we ever were, and that's because of people like you. So thank you from Boston.
And thank you all. I think our time is up, Barry. Yep. So, I mean, already a round of applause for such a great panel. Dave, that was fantastic last comments. But yeah, thank you, everyone. Great session.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you.